On This Week in Enterprise Tech, is Windows 8 a flop, or do we care? We may have the next Wi-Fi generation and one SSD to rule them all. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, Episode 41, recorded May 13th, 2013. One SSD to rule them all. This episode of Twiet is brought to you by MailRoute. MailRoute is an email filtering system in the cloud for companies of any size. If your service is disappearing, talk to MailRoute for price matching on Postini or Forefront contracts. Visit mailroute.net/signup.html and use the promo code Enterprise5. And by RingCentral. We do everything in the cloud. That's why I love my cloud-based phone system by RingCentral. Zero startup costs and RingCentral is $20 per month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. And by Ting.com. Ting is a new mobile phone service that makes sense. Save money with Ting, pay for what you use, doesn't require a contract, and offers unlimited devices on one pooled plan. To save $25 on your first Ting device, visit enterprise.ting.com. That's enterprise.ting.com. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show that's dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But I'm not alone. I brought an all-star cast with me. My panel starting with Mr. Brian Chi, the evangelist for Thin Links and the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, welcome back to Hawaii. Tell us, how are things in Honolulu?
I like humidity. Oh, my skin's finally coming back and not being so crinkly. Anyway, life is good in Hawaii. I actually discovered that there's a new service when you're running a weather app like WeatherBug. I actually drove into the Kaneohe area, and because there was flash flood warnings, it actually sounded an alarm saying you're driving into a danger area. Kind of a cool use of location-based technology.
And it might just save lives. Well, you know, continuing with our life-saving theme, there's the man who saved my life at Las Vegas, Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. You kept me sane, Curtis. And now you're in a hotel in Florida somewhere. Where are you?
I am sitting in the Hilton in Orlando, Florida, the Hilton right next to the Orange County Convention Center, where I'm going to be attending Sapphire all week from one trade show to another.
Your video's frozen at the moment with the most just cute expression on your face, but hopefully that will come back fast enough for us to get through the rundown. Now let's go straight into the Enterprise Bite. We've got a doozy that just ties into enterprise tech just so well, and that is that Windows 8 has flopped. Well, okay, I don't know if you can call 100 million PCs, 100 million units sold a flop, but it has shown a drop in PC shipments way below what they thought they were going to see. We've got IDC releasing their numbers showing that there is a 14% decline year over year for the first quarter. IDC had only forecasted a 7.7% decline. That means it's almost a 100% above the board, above what they thought they were going to lose. Now, this has a couple of ramifications for the enterprise. First, it's the fourth consecutive quarter of decline year over year. So this is not just a fluke. It's not just a slight trend. This is actually a long-term forecast coming true, and that is maybe this is the end of the PC era. Shipments have dropped below $80 million for the first time since 2009. Now, one analyst, Samir Singh at BitChemy, he predicted that tablet shipments could hit 75 to 80 million by the fourth quarter of 2013, which means if you looked at that wonderful graph, you would see PC shipments coming down, tablet shipments coming up, and maybe in the fourth quarter we will see that convergence where you have as many tablets being sold as PCs, and then it passes PCs. Chibert, I want to throw this to you first. We've been talking about this for a while. We've been making fun of the fact that there are so many people who have predicted the end of the PC. But finally, we may be at the point where the other devices will pass PC sales. Does this really mean anything?
No, I think this really means that people are voting with their dollars. Windows 8, everybody I've talked to absolutely hates the fact that there's no start button. They hate the fact that they have to start on the, before mentioned Metro interface that Microsoft can't seem to have a nice snappy name for anymore. I like Windows 8, I really do. It's got a lot of great features. It's all dramatically more stable, but it's got a real lack of identity. And people are saying, no, we're not going to buy it. Windows 7 is good enough. And oh, by the way, we're going to be looking at VDI and running things in tablets or Chromebooks or whatever. Yeah, Microsoft really needs to go and take a really good hard look and maybe go back to their original commitment that they're going to have the ability to do an install and say, I want a classic GUI or I want the new Metro GUI. And I want to be able to have that start button back.
Right. I want to come back to that point that you mentioned about using VDI, because I think that's actually key to some of these metrics. But before we go there, Curtis, let me throw this over to you. We've seen these numbers being driven by upgrade cycles. Enterprise need to refresh their computers because they can no longer do what they need them to do. But the problem with Windows 8 is you have not seen that much adoption. And I'm one of the people who actually likes a lot of the under-the-hood changes of Windows 8. I just don't like the UI. But as we've spoken before, Enterprise is not going to adopt 8. If they're not going to adopt 8, they're not going to buy new hardware. If they're not going to buy new hardware, we're not going to see the bump in the numbers that are required to keep the PC market above that $80 million mark. Do you see this continuing? Is Enterprise going to continue to shun 8? Is the reintroduction of the start bar maybe going to bring some of that back? Or, as we've said before, is Windows 7 just too good to upgrade?
I think what Windows 8 has been the victim of is a perfect storm. We've got Windows 8, which really has not caught the great imagination of the enterprise for a number of reasons. Some of the things we've talked about. I actually saw in Wired magazine a great description. They described Windows 8 as the mullet of operating systems. They try to be both enterprise, all business in the front, and consumer, all party in the back, and they've succeeded kind of in being neither. But bigger than that is the fact that in more and more cases, I'm hearing enterprise users talk about getting rid of the laptop entirely. The laptop is being reserved for special cases. More and more of the enterprise business is being done on a tablet. Now, I think there are a bunch of things going on there. One is that we are seeing people use VDI, using virtual desktops on their tablets. Second is that we've seen a lot of enterprises go to a web-fronted architecture. A lot of those enterprise applications are available through a web front that is accessible from any device. And third, I think what we're finally getting a real picture of is just how much of enterprise computer use is simply email and some sort of instant messenger. All of that can happen on the tablet. The users like the tablets. They're easier to carry. They're less expensive, and they go back and forth. The enterprise IT group is learning to deal with the tablet, and the result is that the PC, whether it be laptop or desktop, is going away. I don't know that that trend is going to reverse itself regardless of what Microsoft does with the next iteration of Windows.
Chibert, I want to go back over to you because you mentioned VDI and the increasing popularity of VDI. We actually mentioned this back in episode 1 of Twight, and that was the hype about the post-PC era was misplaced because just because the so-called traditional PC numbers were decreasing, it doesn't mean that what we do with PCs is going away. It's just people have found another screen. They'll still do PC-type work, but on a tablet or on a smartphone or on any other device that might be connected to the network, say a thin client. Do you think at some point we're going to realize that the decrease of one number at the increase of another number won't freak us out about the end of one era or the beginning of the other, but we'll just see it as screens into VDI?
Yeah, obviously I've made the bet I'm slowly transitioning over from my academic world into the private sector doing VDI. I believe enough in it that I'm risking things. I'm actually getting into a startup. And I think VDI will be the future. I think VDI is going to be the future desktop. I think the connection into the VDI world is going to be on televisions, thin clients, handheld, phones, tablets, and you name it. I think we're coming full circle. I think the era of the green screen is back, and I think it is VDI.
Yeah. What I like is that our chat room has pretty much figured this out. You've got Kevin Dublin, you've got Snooze, you've got Will K, all these different members of our chat room who have figured it out. They're saying, look, there's always going to be room for the number crunching of a PC, of having something in a desktop or a laptop. But for so many people, tablets just will work. They'll do what you need them to do. My question over to you, Curtis, will be, as we look at this future that will be dominated by a plethora of devices, do you think enterprise at some point will have to make a statement that this is acceptable, or is it just going to happen organically? Will people just be showing up to work with tablets, connecting to a VDI service that is provided by that corporation, and going to work as if they were working at a standard desktop?
Well, I think industry-wide, that horse has already left the barn. BYOD is one way of referring to this, but when I talk to corporate IT people, they're doing more and more and more on tablets, and they're thrilled because look at the cost. Tablets are inexpensive. They tend to be easier to support. And people enjoy using them. That's a great combination. Now, there are drawbacks, no question about that. Some of the folks over in the chat room have mentioned the processing power. There are also some security issues, the fact that it's somewhat easier to leave a tablet somewhere than it is to
freeze in mid-sentence. Now, we'll get back to Curtis as soon as he gets back to us over Skype. Sorry, he's coming in through hotel Wi-Fi, so we expected that to happen. But as someone in the chat room mentioned, I'm not sure who that was. It was A Baron, mentioned that it's funny that the analysts who are putting together these reports about the death of the PC are themselves tied to PCs, because you can't really do their kind of work on a tablet. Let's move past the post-PC era and move into the second part of our Enterprise Byte, and that is that Google is consolidating their free and paid storage space. Now, this comes from the Google Enterprise blog, talking about how Google has, basically issued a statement saying we're tired of having 10 megabytes or 10 gigabytes for Gmail, 5 gigabytes of Drive, a little bit for your pictures. Instead, we're going to put everything into one big package, tell you that you have either 15 or 30 gigabytes free, and then draw from that from all the different uses that we have within Google, be it your mail, be it your docs, be it your pictures. Cheebert, this is an interesting trend, and it's also interesting that they made this move right after Microsoft announced that SkyDrive has hit 250 million users. This idea of unified storage, of taking all the different services that you have available to you in the cloud and putting them into one package so you have one pane of glass to see how much storage you're using, is this something that we're going to see as a trend throughout all the different cloud services? Do they want to give you transparency into where your data is going and where is it being stored?
Well, my attitude is it's about time. You know, I've actually asked for this. I actually asked my tech support group, who's like, guys, I've got email, I've got Drive, I've got this, I got that. Why can't I combine it together? And well, maybe now Google's finally decided this was a good thing. From a logistics standpoint, I really don't see why they had them separate all this time, unless they were dramatically different business units that had to physically work on combining their resources. But my attitude is it's about time.
Right. Now, they've also removed the cheapest upgrade option. So you used to be able to get 25 gigabytes for $249 a month. Now the lowest plan is 100 gigabytes for $499. So there is a slight increase if you want to go over the free mark. But you do get a lot more for not all that much a month. It still strikes me as a decent service. Curtis, let me throw this over to you. One of the things that I saw in a chat room was there's still not that much clarity about exactly how this is going to be stored. They understand that that Google wants to put everything into one interface, but does it mean that, like, for example, you'll be able to access your email attachments in your Google Drive? Will your Google Drive also be able to pull up any of the pictures that you've uploaded to Picasa? if that's true, if you do have that sort of interoperability on all your storage platforms, does that raise any concerns in the enterprise? One of the things that we count on over here is that your email storage is separate from, say, your public shared space. If we're breaking down that barrier, does that bode ill for enterprise?
Well, I think this is a logical progression of what's been going on with public cloud services. The enterprise is going to be somewhat used to this, and the big breakdown for most enterprises is the public versus private cloud storage. Once you've made that jump, then I think they tend to treat public the same. So what I suspect we'll see is more insistence that the accounts remain different, that if you're using some sort of enterprise version of Google Docs, that you keep an entirely separate account than anything you're doing privately. Once you're on that enterprise account, though, then I think that that they're used to the security, and that's the way they'll be going.
Thank you, Curtis, or as the chat room will call you shortly, Max Headroom. Well, we'll get Curtis right back. Chibert, let me jump over to you. When we're dealing with this kind of public-private cloud storage service, and the distinction between the two is really just a click, do you think enterprise is going to feel any more secure about using public cloud storage rather than their own private cloud in colo or on-premise storage, because we now have this unified view of what's being stored where?
I think a lot of it's going to be determined on how easy it is to drag and drop or click and copy between the two. There's going to need to be some sort of way of applying business rules to how you move things back and forth. Obviously in something that's heavily regulated as healthcare or finance, this was probably going to be a no-no. But if you're in, say, for instance, education, I know a ton of professors that if they can't drag and drop or click and copy between their personal and business accounts, that they're going to go up in arms and go crazy. So I think there's going to need to be some sort of rules-based system that allows you to implement corporate policy between the two.
Right. Well, I'm sure we're going to cover that again, but for now, I want to move away from the Enterprise Byte. Coming up next is a brand new Wi-Fi array for those who are looking for something for their Soho or for an out-of-the-way spot that they need deployment of wireless services. But before we get there, I'd like to take some time to talk about our first sponsor, and that is someone who has not been on the program for a while, so it's nice to have them back, MailRoute. Now, if you need a migration plan away from Postini or Forefront, we ask you to check out MailRoute. MailRoute is a hosted email filtering service in the cloud for businesses of any size. There's no easier way to filter your email. You don't need any hardware or software. You just point your email to MailRoute, they filter it for you, and deliver clean email to your mail server. MailRoute reduces your cost by eliminating 90% or more of your server load, decreasing bandwidth, and more. No upgrades or updates are necessary. MailRoute service never becomes obsolete. Because MailRoute is in the cloud, it eliminates the need of having a dedicated server for spam filtering. All that's necessary is to sign up with MailRoute and then make a change to your DNS MX records to start the flow of clean email. You don't even have to own or manage your own email server. As long as you have your own domain, MailRoute can filter your email and send it off to your server, wherever it may be. MailRoute's dashboard gives you direct control over every aspect of your service, from setting the sensitivity of the spam filters to adding domains or users or managing whitelists and blacklists. End users can manage their own settings, and administrators can control them all. MailRoute offers free customer support to accounts of all sizes, single users on up. Now, here's a few interesting notes about MailRoute and Twit. Over the last 12 months, we've blocked over 235,000 spam messages for Tom Merritt. That was 99.7% of Tom's total mail volume. We've also blocked nearly 600,000 messages for Leo in the last 12 months. That's over 12 million messages blocked by MailRoute for Leo since he started using the service. MailRoute has store and forward included with standard service that holds your mail up to 15 days, no file limit, if your server goes down, which means it's also a backup. Now, here's what we want you to do. We want you to try it for free. MailRoute will price match on Postini or Forefront contracts. So visit mailroute.net/signup.html and enter the promo code Enterprise5 to start your 15-day free trial. There's no credit card required for the free trial. That's mailroute.net/signup.html, promo code Enterprise5. And we thank MailRoute for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now we're getting into another edition of Pro Gear. This is the Xeris 520.
I'm Father Robert Balaser, the Digital Jesuit, host of Twit, This Week in Enterprise Tech on the Twit Network. And this is another edition of Pro Gear. If you've watched Twit, you probably know what this is, because this is my favoritist Wi-Fi device. This is a Xeris XR Wi-Fi array. The idea is simple. Rather than doing what most manufacturers are doing and designing an AP that spits out energy in all directions, this takes the 360 degrees around the array and divides it up into particular chunks, depending on how many radios you want. These radios are contained on these PCI Express cards that have these funny shaped RF reflectors on it. What this allows me to do is to put more radios into a smaller area without them interfering with one another. If you've ever done work with RF, you know that one of the biggest challenges is finding a way to get all the connectivity that you need without causing interference. Big problem indeed. The Xeris arrays solve that by, well, physically separating the radios and making it possible to reuse the same channels, reuse really close frequencies next to each other because they're not actually interacting with each RF azimuth band. Very cool tech, and with the combined controller that's built into the array, it means that this is a standalone device. I can go into the middle of a stadium, into the middle of a field, put one of these up on a pole, and instantly be supporting thousands of clients. Cool tech, but it had one major drawback. You see, this is a pricey piece of gear. I'm not saying that it's more expensive than gear from other manufacturers. In fact, if you compare it to how much it costs for traditional APs, this is actually incredibly competitively priced. But the problem was, with the smallest array being 4 radios, and with each radio going for about $650, you don't really want to spend upwards of $3,000 to serve out a room that might be in the back, maybe a conference room, a storage room, a small office that only has 1, 2, maybe 3 people. You needed something more cost effective, and that's why Xeris released this. This smoke detector looking device is actually another array. This is their 520. They're calling it an AP because it's not directional, but rather it operates more like what you see on APs from the other manufacturers. Inside here you see that it has 2 sets of radios. One is a combined 2.4 and 5 gigahertz radio. The other is a 5 gigahertz radio. The importance of that is that you can use one radio to bridge to another array, another 520 or say another XR, and then use that second radio to serve out Wi-Fi access. This makes it possible to do quick deployments and extend the reach of your Wi-Fi network. There are a few other really cool features about this. First, it's PoE, so you only have to run one cable. It has a reset button, so it acts more like a SOHO access point. And, this is my favorite, it uses the exact same OS as the big arrays. That's right, if you've learned the operating system, the user interface for the XR series, you'll be right at home with the 520. It will allow you to use the same management software, the same management suite, the same management techniques, which means now you really can deploy this where you have a lot of users and then drop a 520 into that back closet. Now, I'm not sure the big question is going to be, how much does this cost? Well, here's the other sock knocker offer. I'm not sure if that's a phrase, but I just made it up. This is going to retail for about $599. That actually puts it below the traditional non-controller APs that you might buy from the other major manufacturers in the enterprise Wi-Fi gear field. Not only that, because it does have its own controller, it means it's just as standalone as one of the big XRs. Take this, put it into a SOHO, and boom, you've got enterprise class wireless, and it's good to go. Now, I am hopefully going to be able to take a look at one of the 520s in depth, actually show you how it performs, but if the XR series is any indication, this has become the new state-of-the-art in small Wi-Fi deployment. I'm Father Robert Balaser. This is the XR, this is the 520, this is the Xeris Wi-Fi Playroom, and this has been Pro Gear.
Now, Brian, we have played a lot with Xeris arrays over the last couple of years. In fact, they came to us when they were just a startup, and we've been using them at Interop pretty much since then. We've loved their large arrays, but these 520s really have me intrigued because they address one of the biggest issues that some of the larger enterprises have had with the Xeris arrays, which is they were great for large spaces, not so great for small spaces. Now they can offer a self-contained, not an array, but an omnidirectional AP that is less expensive than most of their competitors and offers the same functionality as a lot of the larger arrays. Tell me, are you going to use any of these 520s in your deployment?
Actually, I'm thinking there's a friend of mine that's going to be setting up a mini golf in the Mission District, and I'm thinking I'm going to put a larger array upstairs to cover all his customers, and we're going to have a nice small array downstairs to cover his office. It sounds like a match made in heaven or match made in a putt-putt golf.
Right. Now, someone in the chat room, I can't remember who it was, asked why we would need to do a bridge, why we would do a 5 gigahertz bridge if we already had PoE, if we had PoE power. Well, what we've done in the past is we can supply PoE even when we don't have a haul to the network. And this allows us to, say, slave a dozen of these 520s off of a larger XR array, have the XR array in the middle, and then put those 520s at the edge where the signal starts to drop off. It's a really, really nice way to quickly and inexpensively expand the range of your Wi-Fi network. Now, Curtis, I want to go over to you because we have a unique experience of Wi-Fi when we do these conferences, and that is we know that Wi-Fi will eventually die. That's why anytime we're broadcasting from the show, we always demand that we have a wired connection. So my question to you is, do people in the enterprise still understand that Wi-Fi, even though it's very, very effective and it's really, really improved over the last decade or so, is still a best effort practice? Or do they expect that a Wi-Fi system will be as secure and as solid as a wired Ethernet network?
I think with most enterprises, we're at a point where they really do expect essentially the same behavior from the Wi-Fi network that they have from a cable. You know, this is one of the cases where IT has been so good that they have raised the level of expectation. And for most users, they don't even think of making a difference between cabled and non-cabled. It's only when you get into places like the data center or highly technical users who know that they're going to be shoving large quantities of data back and forth that users even think to ask the question. So I think for most enterprises these days, when it comes to going to an endpoint, wireless is the network.
All right. Chibert, I want to throw over to you because I just realized we take the technology behind the Xeris devices, the array and the AP, for granted because we've been using it for so long. And one of the buzzwords is that it has a controller. It has a controller inside of it, so it's standalone. Some people may not understand what that means. What's the difference between, say, an AP from another major manufacturer, I won't name any, that requires you to have a switch or an external controller, and something like a Xeris 520 or Xeris XR array that has a controller built inside?
Well, the thing that makes them very, very different is best illustrated, I wish I had it, is when they do a heat map in a, say, like a warehouse or a school, where you're trying to get the energy of the Wi-Fi down these long aisles full of metal. And in a traditional AP, it's just going to go out in all directions, and it's going to bounce around. You're going to get all these reflected signals around, and your Wi-Fi signal is going to very, very quickly degrade. What Xeris has done is because it has sector antennas, it can actually direct the energy down where you need it. And in the case of the new series, you can actually just not even buy panels, not even buy radios for the direction you don't want to point. But with the controller, it allows us to vary the amount of energy between each of the sectors so that it makes more sense. So you don't need to blast it. If when the controller goes and makes the contact to the Wi-Fi client, it sees it's getting a great signal, maybe it can start sneaking back the energy a little bit so it's more efficient. And that's one of the really big differences. It's a more intelligent way of using RF energy instead of blasting it all over and having it bounce around and become things like late collisions. Because if you take a bouncing path, It's a longer path, and all of a sudden the return signal is coming in late. It's like a late collision. And that's one of the really big problems when you start dealing with a lot of RF energy and Wi-Fi in general, especially when you start dealing with offices where there's lots and lots of metal.
Right. One of the uses that I'm really hoping to play with, I've asked Xeris if they'd send us a pair of their 520s to review on Twight, is you can set it into bridge mode so that you could put the 520 up high, try to get some signal from another Wi-Fi array, bridge it off to a wired network, and also repeat the signal for the local people. It's a really cool way to think of branch office accessibility in an area that's maybe divided by football size areas, open fields. For me, the kind of deployments I do, it's the perfect deployment tool, and I'm looking forward to it. Now, coming up next, we're going to be talking all about enterprise SSDs, why you need them, why you want them, and what they can do for you. But before we get to that, I do want to take time for another sponsor. This time, it's RingCentral. Now, you know RingCentral. We love RingCentral. We've been talking about RingCentral for all this time because, well, we like to eat our own dog food. And when we tell people that they should move into the cloud, well, by darn it, we're going to do it ourselves. When Leo built the brick house, we chose to do as much as we could in the cloud. We store our documents. We hold our meetings. We do our docs. Our show rundowns are done in Google Docs. And we didn't want a big PBX system in the basement. So when Russell, our IT guy, told us that we could get a cloud-based phone system through RingCentral, well, it was a no-brainer. We love RingCentral. There are zero startup costs. There's no PBX hardware to install or maintain. And RingCentral allows us to customize all of our call handling. Our producers get their voicemail and their emails, and we can even get our fax messages right on our smartphones. And now they have a brand spanking new feature, RingCentral Conferencing. You can get your own single conference bridge number, ready for unlimited conference calls for up to 1,000 participants. Lots of features. You can mute participants. You can get caller count. You can record conferences and more. It's easy to use. It works with your desk phone, iPhone, or Android, or RingCentral soft phone. And it's free with your monthly service. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to try RingCentral now. RingCentral offers all-inclusive pricing as low as $20 per month per user. You can start right now with a 30-day risk-free trial. So call this number, designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. Again, 800-543-9980, because threes are lucky. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use the promo code TWIT. That's ringcentral.com, promo code TWIT. And we thank RingCentral for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's get back to it. We've got a special guest, that's right, straight from Kingston. That is the king of all things memory. We've got Cameron Crandall, who is the Senior Technology Manager. Cameron, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell people a little bit about yourself? We met at CES, and back then you were spouting some serious hardware. But tell us, what is it that you do at Kingston?
So I work on the engineering team here at Kingston, specifically on our SSD product line. I've been with Kingston for 17 years now. 10 years of that was on the storage side of our business, kind of not so well-known storage division of Kingston, where we built SCSI and fiber channel disk arrays and other removable storage devices. And I joined the SSD team in 2008, and I am heavily immersed in our SSD technology today.
Now, Kingston is more commonly known for some of your other memory products. You make some very fast flash drives. You make some very durable flash drives. But you've also made a name for yourself in enterprise and consumer level SSDs. I've actually got one right here. This is the Kingston SSD Now, the 100 series of enterprise drives. My question to you is this. What's the difference between an enterprise drive and a consumer drive? Is it just the labeling?
Not entirely. I think the that can be somewhat subjective depending on the user and the application. But typically, an enterprise class SSD or an SSD that's built for server use and server workloads generally uses NAND flash that has a higher endurance rating than what would be used on a notebook or desktop client type of application. So typically, server class SSDs have higher endurance, and the other feature associated with server class SSDs is a power fail circuit, where we actually put power caps on the SSD, so that in the event there's a sudden power loss to the system, and we have writes that are in motion, we can commit those writes to flash, and we can shut that drive down properly. So typically it's a power fail circuit and higher endurance NAND flash that typically constitutes a server class SSD. Now, with that being said, there's also another set of users that prefer to use typical desktop client SSDs in their server environment because of the cost factor. And they're typically doing more reading than writing. So they want that lower cost device because for them, they don't need the write cycles that maybe a higher end enterprise class drive delivers that carries a higher price point. So they go for the lower cost desktop drive. So it really depends on the workload of the application, the mentality of the user as to kind of what they prefer, their budget. And then that kind of dictates what direction they go in terms of a drive. But currently today, yeah, you've got our E100. That is definitely targeted at the higher end, higher workload type environment with the power fail circuit on it.
Yeah. Curtis, I want to throw over to you, because he mentioned something that's very important, and that is that there are many enterprises that are going with consumer-level SSDs rather than the enterprise-level SSDs. And, of course, that's for price. Consumer-level SSDs can be significantly less expensive than the same sized counterparts, and the speed is actually comparable. Typically, enterprise SSDs have better write speeds, but the consumer levels can have even better read speeds. My question is this: Do enterprise IT managers actually understand the risks of using consumer-level SSDs, or are they just mitigating it by, say, swapping out hardware more quickly?
I think it's going to depend on two things. One is that you do have in the larger enterprises people who are storage specialists. Those specialists have studied SSD characteristics. They know the ins and outs. And I think that any enterprise large enough to have storage specialists on board are probably going to be big enough to be willing to eat the costs of the enterprise level devices. It's those smaller enterprises, the ones that are using enterprise IT generalists for all of their positions, where they are probably going to be looking at going with the consumer level devices and assuming that that they can swap a few of these in and out, or that companies like Kingston have just been very, very conservative in their ratings, and that in all likelihood, they're going to commit far fewer writes to a device than the rated life anyway. It's really a gamble. Like so much in the reliability and security games in the enterprise, it depends on exactly how many sides the die you're rolling has. And for a lot of the smaller enterprises, they're willing to go with the 20-sided die of power.
I like that. Let me go back over to you, Cameron. Now, I can understand why this is more durable. So you're using better quality memory. You're allowing it to have tech that lets you recover data in case that there's a chance of corruption. But for that smaller enterprise who is really price conscious, they see that a drive of the same size and more or less the same speed that's consumer rated can be a third less expensive. And so they're probably thinking, look, I'll buy 2 of these things, I'll put them into a RAID, and therefore I'll get all the advantages of an enterprise level drive, but at not nearly as much of the cost. What's wrong with that thinking? What would you say to someone who was considering doing that, getting 2 consumer drives rather than actually taking the dip and getting an enterprise level product?
Yeah, it really it's a great question. So I think it kind of goes back to when I talk about the mentality of the user. What's their experience been with SSDs? What their confidence level is, and then kind of getting it back to their workload. There's customers that have working set data that they're going to use on the SSD, and if they do have a failure failure of some sort and even data loss, they can potentially regenerate that data quickly. You still have all of the RAID capabilities with an SSD. So yeah, let's put an SSD on the shelf. If one of them fails, 6, 8, a year down the road, 6 or 8 months to a year down the road, we'll just swap that out. So that mentality definitely exists. And again, I think it just depends on the mentality of the user and kind of what the workload is. If the data is, if they can lose the data, we generally see customers gravitating toward the lower cost drives and just kind of viewing it as a disposable SSD. When they fail, we'll just replace it with a new one. So kind of two schools of thought out there.
Cameron, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you for a second. We've got Cabo Zone in the chat room who's saying, and if the cheaper drives are connected to a RAID controller with battery-backed write cache, isn't that the same? And so he's referring to comparing one of these to, say, 2 consumer-level drives. Let me throw this over to Cheeber. Cheeber, what would you say to someone who was considering going the cheaper route with 2 drives rather than 1 enterprise-class drive?
I don't know. It's kind of... I've not made up my mind yet. I'm of the opinion that the only true way of archiving data is on an archival medium like, say, Blu-ray. But that's really not going to work for most enterprise. The science world needs to have long-term storage. So, yeah, I'm pretty cheap. I've got a really teeny tiny budget. So doing a RAID 0 of multiple less expensive drives sounds really good. But I've had to rebuild RAID arrays. And the number of RAID arrays that I keep losing just because it was a cheap drive has been very, very painful. So you really got to start taking a good hard look at how much is that data worth to you and how much is your time worth. Right. If I can afford it and the project I'm working on is very data sensitive, I'm probably going to lean towards the enterprise drives rather than the cheap ones.
Right, right. Well, I think that's what it comes down to, which is it's really, really cheap to go with 2 consumer-level drives until you start working in how much your time costs as an IT administrator, as an IT manager, as an IT worker. If your time is free, then yeah, consumer-level drives are fine. But if you're one of these people who doesn't want to be debugging a system or constantly swapping out drives, then, the enterprise drive might be the way to go. Cameron, I want to move away from price a little bit and move into speed and durability. We've already talked about the things that you've changed in the enterprise class drives in order to make them more reliable. Do you have use cases for that reliability coming into play?
Yeah. So, if you've got an application where there's a high number of writes, we typically have customers that are either doing a tremendous number of reads or a tremendous number of writes. And one case in particular was a customer who was building a 24 drive server for online transaction processing, and they required very, very high write endurance. And for their particular workload, our E100 drive with the endurance that we offer on that was necessary for their particular application. And kind of going into the speed aspect a little bit, this project that we worked on with this company, they were looking to see if they could achieve over 1 million IOPS with commercially available products. And we actually exceeded that by quite a bit. We actually hit 1.8 million IOPS for their particular configuration. We used 3 LSI RAID controllers and then stripe those drives, those 24 drives. And, we did this at a very, very low price point. So yeah, online transaction processing in this particular case was the need, and they had a very, very high write workload that required the higher endurance drives.
Cameron, let me ask you, in the past, if you've wanted really high IOPS, you'd have to go with a solution from, say, Fusion IO or from Violin Memory, something that specializes in these massively expensive, massively parallel storage systems. How close to their performance can you get with, say, a couple of enterprise class drives tied in parallel?
So the PCI Express cards do a very good job in terms of IOPS, and you can get, I was just looking at this the other day, up to or over 1 million IOPS out of a single card. So in our particular case, we would have to string up 16 to 24 drives across 3 controllers to achieve that level of performance. So yeah, we do have to string up quite a few drives to hit those same performance points that you can get with a Fusion IO type of device. And the Fusion IO types of devices, they've got their pros and cons. We still see a lot of customers wanting to stick to kind of that traditional storage model, where you've got front-loading access to the drives. You can implement redundancy practices through various RAID levels, which you don't get with a PCI-based controller. But to answer your question, in terms of bandwidth performance, we can hit the bandwidth numbers that a PCI Express card can with just a few SSDs. On the IOPS side, we have to put quite a few of them together with additional host controllers to be able to get to the same point that the PCI card can get to. So they do definitely have an advantage in terms of IOPS performance, but on the cons side of things, with the lack of redundancy and serviceability, we still see a lot of customers leaning towards the traditional 2.5-inch form factor model.
Right. Now let me ask you this. How fast can you push this technology? One of the things that's being asked in the chat room is they want to know why striping is desired, where you figure the optimal combination of drives is found. What are the things that go into creating a high-performance array with SSDs?
So one of the things that's been lacking over the last several years is the RAID controller technology. When SSDs hit the market, RAID controllers were really optimized for hard drives and not so optimized for SSDs. So what we've achieved over the last couple of years here is the top RAID controller vendors have tuned their firmware more for SSD technology. So we're getting a lot better performance out of SSD arrays than we ever have in the past. The level of PCI Express you're running, whether it's PCIe 2.0 or 3.0, PCIe 3.0 has enabled us to kind of reach that next tier in performance, and that was what we were showing at CES. So it's a combination of having newer RAID controller technology, as well as running in a PCI Express 3.0 bus. And then it really just depends on how fast the SSD is. So as we add SSDs to a RAID array, let's say a RAID 0 array, if you get 500 megabytes a second out of one drive, you should get 1,000 megabytes a second out of two drives until you reach that saturation point of the controller. So I think what your viewer is asking is, what is that saturation point of the controller? And what we found is today, with the current crop of PCI Express 3.0 cards on the market, that saturation point in terms of a bandwidth perspective is at about 8 drives. Now, that could vary depending on the controller, but we're finding that about 8 drives will fully saturate the performance capability of the RAID controllers that are on the market.
All right. Okay, so 8 drives is our magic number. Chibert, let me throw over to you. You've been playing with SSDs and performance arrays for quite a while. What are you finding on your side of testing? I mean, are we seeing the numbers that we need to be able to see to move these test systems, these dream systems, these really cool high-performance SSD RAID systems into an actual production and enterprise environment?
Yeah, actually, when we start bringing in private clouds into the lab for testing, virtualized servers and so forth, whenever we don't specify to the vendors exactly how they need to go and set up their drives, I've almost always seen them set it up RAID 0 and stripe it so they can get the maximum possible performance out of their systems. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about is the fact that there used to be a technology, it still exists for Microsoft, called the storage server, that dealt with tiered storage. Back when your Ultra 320s and your fiber channel drives were god-awful expensive, and SATAs were cheaper and optical was cheaper still, Microsoft created a technology where you could actually age your data so that you'd keep the stuff used most often in the fast, expensive drives. But as it starts getting less use, it drops into the slower drives and then eventually to optical. I think, now that we're starting to see a lot of SSDs and things like that, that perhaps we might want to start taking another good hard look at it. I just think Microsoft needs to go and put a little more investment into the product, because right now it is a pain in the behind to set up. But it is a good technology, and I think the idea behind it is sound, especially with the radically different costs between spinning disks and solid-state drives.
Right. Curtis, let me throw over to you with the enterprise efficiency perspective. Have you ever dealt with the SSD question in any of your programming?
We actually have. We've had a number of radio programs, E2 radio, on SSD storage. And one of the things that we are finding is that companies absolutely do want to take advantage of SSD. The thing that they are doing now is growing more sophisticated. As Cameron's referred to, we're getting beyond the point where you can say, hey, we are just going to throw SSDs in there, and having the different technology will give us all of the speed that we need. Instead, we need to look at the entire architecture. And when you go to something like an SNW conference where they're dealing with storage on a wide basis, then we are finding that they are getting more sophisticated. And I think that's a good sign. The people this is really playing with is the database administrators, where they used to earn a lot of living going through and talking about how to stripe across spinning platters. Now they're dealing with SSDs, and it's changing their game entirely.
Right. Cameron, let me go back over to you to ask you about one of the questions that needs to be asked, and that is ROI. Anyone who is considering a move to SSDs in the enterprise is going to ask the question, okay, well, how much is this going to cost? Where am I going to recuperate that cost? What is the return on investment of installing SSDs into an enterprise?
Yeah, I think that you kind of look at this at a basic level, and that is, which we preach a lot, is SSDs enable you to do more with less. So if you're ganging up spinning platter drives to get IOPS performance out of your system to speed up an application, we can literally take hundreds of hard drives out of a data center and create a small group of SSDs and get more IOPS performance out of that. So that's one example. Using a small array to speed up database caching, again, transaction, enabling yourself to process more transactions with an SSD cache setup. We're not at the point yet where SSDs are going out and replacing refrigerator-sized enclosures full of hard drives with solid-state drives. We're still seeing SSDs being used in kind of that hybrid model, directly attached, typically inside the server, as an all flash-based array or a combination of spinning disk and SSD. But I think kind of the 30,000-foot view is SSDs enable us to do more with less, and the amount of performance you can get out of just a small number of SSDs with the array controllers that are available on the market today is really incredible. And you can still stick to that traditional storage model that we're all kind of comfortable with, right? We've users have been setting up RAID arrays for years. They know the difference between RAID 0, 1, 5, and 10. And they can run RAID zeros with no redundancy and get the fastest performance, or they can implement RAID 10 if their data is a little bit more sensitive and they want to build some redundancy into their arrays. But I think this is really a great time in terms of SSD technology, the controllers that we're using in the SSDs. Endurance is much better understood today, and again, I think to kind of drive the point home, the ability to push out the number of IOPS with just a 4, 6, or 8 drive SSD array is really incredible. So, any type of server application where you can speed up your IOPS with really just a few drives. There's a vast number of ROI benefits from that.
All right. Cheebert, I want to throw this over to you because we're getting comments in the chat room that are asking, well, what's the ROI of a rebuild? Are you working in the cost of having to swap out SSDs? But there's actually a video, we just played it, that it compared 6 enterprise-class Kingston SSDs versus a 24 hard drive array. And what they found was that in that performance test, they got 91% more transactions. They got 184% greater performance per watt. You've got 1/2 the space versus a dedicated storage array. And so all of these things translate into better bottom line for the IT geek, for the data center geek, for the colo administrator. Do people know about those added benefits? Not just the speed, but also reducing the amount of power you take, reducing the amount of the size of the rack that you're going to require for any given application, and also for increasing the number of transactions that you're going to get for things like databases. Does that get worked into the calculus, or are people just stuck on pure speed?
I think a lot of people tend to trip on speed. But if anyone's getting ready to spend a lot of money on a forklift upgrade for drives in general, they're going to have to start looking at other things like power consumption, heat, and so forth. Now, let's take a really big step back. The number one reason why spinning hard drives fail is heat and vibration. Now, with a solid state drive, no more, much less heat, almost no vibration. So you're reducing the number one cause of hard drive premature failure to begin with. So when we start bringing in the ROI of the rebuilds, well, in theory, I do stress that word theory, an SSD should be considerably more reliable no matter what, because the number one, vibration and heat have been taken out of the equation or dramatically reduced. Now, TVS Egon was making a crack about 9 fives of reliability. That's actually a pretty good way to describe RAID in general. You need to also make sure that when you're sizing your hard drive, you're also sizing your RAID controller. Everybody's heard my rant on PERC 300s about 10 episodes ago, and that just really illustrates you need to spend just as much money on your RAID controllers as you do on your drives, because if you have a really crappy, slow RAID controller, even a really beautiful drive like an enterprise-grade Kingston isn't going to help you, because the RAID controller isn't keeping up, and it's going to corrupt your data even if the drive hasn't. So that's something you really need to take firmly in mind.
Curtis, let me throw over to you. Just judging from what I'm seeing in the chat room, it kind of echoes what I'm hearing across the channel, and that is enterprise doesn't really get SSDs yet. They see them as very fast, and they love them in desktops and laptops, but for some reason, we're stuck into thinking that they're not going to make good for enterprise applications. They're not reliable enough. They're too difficult to rebuild. They cost too much. Why is it that you think, even in the face of all this other evidence that shows that they use less power, in the long run they're less expensive, they're more reliable, we're still so stuck on hard drives?
Padre, I think that the big reason that enterprises are still looking at SSDs as limited application devices has to do with cost and just the newness. What we are seeing is much more emphasis on tiering of storage and people being willing to deploy SSDs in that top tier for specialized applications. Now, you're right. In terms of the major analytics databases, they're less willing to go there. But we are seeing wider adoption, and I think that as the cost comes down, we're going to see many more people willing to adopt SSDs for more and more applications. But just like we've been talking about earlier in the show with PCs, we've got to deal with this adoption cycle. So I think that what we're really looking for is greater SSD adoption over the next 5 years. It's not going to happen suddenly, but by the end of this decade, I think it's going to be the standard way of doing business.
All right. Cameron, let me go back to you with the same question. And that is, why is it that you think people are so fixated on hard drives? Why do you think they associate hard drives with reliability, with rebuildability, whereas they tend to poo-poo SSDs?
Yeah, I think there's still some concern out there in regards to the fact that SSDs do wear out over time. How do we monitor the wear on the drives? Definitely cost is an issue in some cases, but I think it's I think one of the things we have got over the last 3 or 4 years with client-based SSDs is a lot of confidence in the technology. And I think we need more of that confidence to bleed over into the data center user. And we're doing that here at Kingston on a daily basis, trying to communicate, that message. But I think it'll still take some more time. And I would agree. I think the adoption rate of SSDs in the data center is going to continue to grow. We're seeing it here. It was literally overnight, at the end of 2012, we really saw a surge in the need for SSDs for server use. And, we had a number of customers that were, taking our client level SSDs and putting them into servers. But almost overnight, it seemed that there was a big push to begin to use SSDs in the data center. So I think we've still got some confidence building to do. And I think the price does still need to come down a bit. And I think it'll be a while before, again, where I think we're seeing large scale storage arrays in the hundreds of of SSDs being used. But I think for the foreseeable future, we'll continue to see a growing number of SSDs being used as that tiered storage caching device in the server.
Yeah. Cameron, I want to ask you one last question because it's been asked repeatedly in the chat room, and that is, how difficult is it to do a secure erase of data on an SSD? And this is actually germane to the enterprise. If I've got an array of drives and I want to make sure that no one else can read that data, it's even more difficult than a hard drive because I can't just shoot the data. You can actually get the data off of memory chips still on board. What tools are there to make sure that my data is securely erased?
So on all of the Kingston drives, we support the ATA security command. So we can actually execute a secure erase command that where that sanitization of data actually happens at the hardware level. And we basically zero out the entire drive. So all the NAND area, including any hidden areas that the NAND controller would use for any of its background operations. So our recommendation is the best method to clean an SSD is through a secure erase command, as long as the SSD supports secure erase. Typically, we need to pull the drives off of a RAID controller and attach to a native SATA port on the motherboard to execute the secure erase command. So there is a bit of a manual process if you're taking drives out of a RAID array. And we use a program called HDD Erase or HD Parm to execute that secure erase command. But it happens at the hardware level on the SSD.
I like that. And for everyone in the chat room, I think that actually works a whole lot better than Thermite. Well, we're going to get right back to it. But first, I want to take just a moment to talk about the last supporter for this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And of course, it had to be Ting. Now, what is Ting? Ting is a no BS mobile service. They are a reseller of the nationwide Sprint network. So you know that it's going to be good. They're tied to one of the bigs. Now, you might be asking yourself, how is Ting different? Well, there are no contracts. There's no ETFs. It's truly and completely contract-free. There's no bundling or ride-along services. You choose from extra small to extra large service levels for your voice, your text, your megabytes of data, all billed separately. There are also no overage charges or penalties. If you use more than you thought you would, you just pay for what you used. You also get credits on unused service. If you use less than you thought you would, Ting drops you down to the level you hit and credits the difference on your next bill. When was the last time your cell phone provider gave you money back? There are also no add-on charges. Voicemail, caller ID, tethering, hotspot, three-way calling, call forwarding, all the other features are part of your service. You get no add-ons. And there are also no mysterious line items on your bill. Ting charges you for what you've used, plus whatever taxes they're legally required to collect. No hidden charges, no hidden fees, no other BS. Ting also gives you unlimited devices on one plan. You can share your minutes, share your data, share your messages. Each extra device only costs you $6 per month per device. You also get a powerful online account control panel. You can take control of your account, your usage, and bills in a powerful online control panel that, well, is just really, really simple to use. They also give you no-holds customer support. You can call them at 1-855-TING-FTW. That's 1-855-TING-FTW anytime between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and a real person will pick up the phone. Also, if you don't like calling people, they have an excellent online support option at help.ting.com. They have an active forum with simple and powerful help ticketing systems, video tutorials, video startup guides, and much, much more. Now, how does Ting work? Well, it works really simply. First, you purchase your mobile device from Ting, and you'll receive it in 2 to 5 business days. Then you activate your device with Ting, and you have the option to select a new phone number or port an existing one. Finally, you select the monthly minutes, messages, and megabytes that you think represent your usage, and Ting will bill you at the beginning of your payment period, but you will be charged or credited in the following for what you actually used. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to visit Ting today at enterprise.ting.com. You can save money and better manage your mobile phone usage with Ting. Check out their savings calculator and see how much you or your company can save. Twiat viewers also save $25 off your first Ting device when you sign up. So visit enterprise.ting.com and start saving today. And we thank Ting for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, you've done it. You've used up another hour listening to the best darn Skype-interrupted enterprise show on the interwebs. I want to thank my panel for being here and for being, well, just so patient with us. Starting with you, Chibert. How are things going? Where are you traveling to next? Where should people expect to see you?
I am going to be first really early tomorrow morning, like 6 a.m. flights. That means I need to be at the airport by 4 a.m. Yeah. Anyway, I'm heading to Redmond. Microsoft is hosting a reviewers workshop. We're going to be talking about clouds and some of the new things happening in the cloud arena. Then Padre and I get to go and play at Maker Faire, and secret. Ought to be interesting. And then lastly, I'm going to be at Citrix Synergy in Los Angeles. So if there is any of the Twiat Riot that wants to come and see me in Thin Link's garb and play with some of those thin clients, great. By the way, big shout out to the Twiat Riot that came to see us at Interop, and to the gentleman that won the thin client during the raffle of my VDI talk. Ho, 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 Twiat Riot.
Twiat Riot indeed. Now, assuming that we have him back and the hotel isn't throttling his Skype, Curtis, could you tell us what you're up to and where you're off to next?
Padre, right now I am in Orlando, Florida for SAP's Sapphire Conference. I'm going to be here all week. People should look at enterpriseefficiency.com to see what's going on from Sapphire. Then it's back to the swamp for a couple of weeks before I head out to New Orleans for Microsoft Tech Ed. Do want to tell people to put one thing on their calendar. May 30th, I'm going to have Glenn Evans, who's the director of the Interop Network Operations on E2 Radio. It's going to be a great show, and I think a lot of people would love to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely. And finally, over to you, Cameron. Thank you very much for being part of Twiat today, for dropping all the knowledge about enterprise SSDs on us. What are you doing at Kingston? What does Kingston have coming up? What do you think the Twiat Riot needs to know about your memory goodness?
Well, For me, I travel throughout the country literally on a weekly basis. But yeah, I think if you're looking at SSD technology and you're thinking about installing SSDs into your data center, one of the things that Kingston offers that's kind of unique from some of our competitors is we have a very liberal evaluation process. So get in touch with a Kingston representative, and if you want to sample SSDs in your servers and kind of try before you buy, we'll set you up with a set of drives depending on the RAID level you're running, and give them a shot.
Thank you very much for being on. It's always a pleasure to hear from experts in the field. And you know what? Your topic is particularly near and dear to my heart. After all, who doesn't want fast and nearly indestructible storage? I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, starting with, our super producer, Karsten, and our absolutely fantastic TD, Jason. I'm going to get to Jason in a little bit, but before we go to him, a few notes to you. That's right, you, the person listening or watching this show right now. Did you know that you could have the show delivered to your devices every week without any further participation from you? That's right. Go right now to the Twiet show page at twit.tv/Twiet, and you'll find all the ways that the show can be automatically dropped into your device of choice each and every single week. You want to drop it into your iPad? Of course. You want to put it on your iPhone? That's a no-brainer. You want it on your Android tablet or your phone or even your Zune. You want it into your RSS-enabled device? We'll do it because we want you to get Twiet the way that you want to get Twiet. You want an audio version for the car? You want a video version for the house? We get it to you because we know you need to know what's going on in the enterprise. Also, in case you like the show, you may want to drop by live. That's right, on Mondays at noon, each and every single week, we do the show live out of the Brick House. And you can drop by going to live.twit.tv. And while you're there, why not drop into the chat room at irc.twit.tv. There you'll find some of the most innovative posts, some of the most brilliant trolls, some of the coolest engineers you've ever met. Because as we all know, Twit is really an experiment in temporary community. Why not also drop by our Twiet YouTube page at youtube.com/Twiet. There's an added bonus. If you go to that page, if you subscribe, you'll get access to all of the videos that go into Twiet. That includes Stuff My IT Guy Says, The Data Closet, Pro Gear, Pro Tip, all of the little bits and pieces that make Twiet so interesting. That's a way for you to get a little extra something out of being part of the Twiet Riot. Also, follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you follow me, you'll be able to participate in, the discussion about each week's Twiet. You can tell me what you didn't like. You can tell me what you liked. You can tell me what you want in the future, and you'll find out what's going on in the life of the digital Jesuit. Finally, I want to thank Cyberdog in the chat room, who, he was part of our Interop team, and he's the guy who turns all of our shows into show notes. And before we go away, Jason, might you have a camera that's pointed towards you?
Oh my gosh, I do.
Oh,
hey, that was weird.
I didn't see you there.
Did you set this up?
I think I did. I may have asked someone to do it for me. It's one of those remote hand situations. I just wanted to ask you, we have a lot of people in the enterprise who bring their Android phones in, and they just want to know how to use them better. Does the Twit network have any sort of show that maybe caters to Android?
I don't know, but there is a show called All About Android, and it, I think, talks about exactly what you're mentioning there. You can find it if you want to watch it. It's every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific at live.twit.tv. You can catch it live, or you can catch it in the feeds shortly after at twit.tv/AAA for All About Android.
That's right, AAA, which is fantastic because Jason will be doing the shows completely sleep-deprived as he's taking care of a brand new baby.
But don't worry, I'll shoot it all through glass. I pick up my pair tonight, so you can be just as tired as me.
And now he's mocking me because he knows I don't have my glass yet. Well, I'm Father Robert Balassier, glassless, and I just want to remind you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.